In the modern world, a sloth's greatest peril is falling off a branch. But during the Pleistocene, the sloth was the predator's greatest nightmare. Meet the Megatherium, a 4-ton wall of muscle and bone armor that made saber-toothed cats look like kittens. It didn't climb trees. It conquered them. It didn't hide. It stood its ground. So, how did evolution replace a nearly 300-ton organic battle tank with a tiny creature so slow that moss grows on its fur? The truth is more brutal than you think. What exactly happened to these animals to make their modern descendants appear so vulnerable? What ancient dangers compelled them to grow to such immense sizes, and what ultimately caused these massive bear sloths to vanish from the face of the earth? The prehistoric giant, known to science as Megatherium, was truly gargantuan, reaching weights of up to 4 metric tons. It was significantly heavier than a family car, outweighed a hippopotamus, and possessed roughly half the mass of a Tyrannosaurus rex. While a tree sloth today weighs a mere 11 pounds, its ancient relative was a staggering 1,000 times more massive. If one of these creatures had accidentally fallen on you, you wouldn't be anything anymore. The most alarming attribute of Megatherium was not merely its bulk, but its incredible vertical reach. While modern sloths spend their entire lives stuck tethered to branches for survival, Megatherium was a ground-dwelling colossus that viewed trees from an upright position. When this beast reared up on its rear legs, it could reach heights of nearly 20 feet. That is high enough to peer directly into a second-story window. Frankly, if they had ever attempted to climb a tree, it would have been like trying to place an elephant on a branch. Rest in peace to that tree. So, it is clear this sloth was absolutely massive. But why did it evolve in this particular direction? Isn't the traditional strategy of a sloth to utilize camouflage and remain hidden? Obviously, you cannot hide very well when you are the size of a bull elephant. These giant sloths adopted a strategy that was slightly different from their modern cousins, though they were still sluggish. They lived in a world prowled by saber-toothed cats and massive short-faced bears. In an environment teeming with lethal carnivores, a slow-moving herbivore is faced with 2 choices: disappear or become a tank. By achieving such massive scale, Megatherium effectively became impossible for predators to eat. A hunter looks at a 4-ton wall of muscle and organic bone armor and quickly realizes the struggle simply isn't worth the energy. It is the same evolutionary logic that protects modern elephants today. Maintaining a huge body is metabolically expensive, but it grants you total immunity from almost any threat. Since they were as slow as a sloth, they weren't good at chasing anything down, but they were exceptional at holding their ground. Even if your prey is a group of immobile plants, you can chase that down at a singular mile per hour. Just like today's sloths, these giants were herbivores, but they weren't consuming high-calorie energy bars. They were eating twigs, leaves, and tough scrub. This type of forage is essentially garbage in terms of real nutrition. To extract enough energy to survive, you require a massive digestive tract to ferment all that tough plant matter. Essentially, Megatherium was a walking fermentation vat. Modern sloths possess this trait as well, taking an entire month to process a single meal. However, because they are so small, they have zero energy left over to actually move. Megatherium was so large that its internal metabolic furnace generated enough heat and energy to let it actually accomplish tasks. They were still definitely slow, but likely moved at least 1 mile per hour, compared to modern sloths which move at a pace of 0.2 miles per hour. It still wasn't fast enough to hunt fleet-footed prey or outrun predators, but it was enough to strike back and defend its territory. So, how much strength did they truly possess? You know how today's sloths have that famous death grip where their tendons lock into place? This allows them to hang from a branch for hours without utilizing any muscle energy. They can even die completely and remain hanging there. It is why modern sloths remain dangerous to approach, even if they cannot chase you. If they grab you once, they will never let go. Now, imagine that level of grip on a creature, 1,000 times more massive. Megatherium didn't just have strong arms. It could literally terraform the entire landscape. Since they were too heavy to climb trees to reach the fresh leaves at the canopy, they adopted a much more violent feeding solution. They would simply grab the trunk and rip the entire tree down to the ground. This wasn't necessarily a negative thing, as they fit a very specific ecological niche that no one else was strong enough to occupy. By toppling trees, they prevented forests from becoming stagnant systems. Every tree they damaged let sunlight reach the forest floor, triggering a burst of growth for grasses, shrubs, and fast-growing plants. Over time, this created a constantly shifting mosaic of open patches and regrowth, rather than a stable, dense forest where tall trees block photosynthesis for everything below. If a saber-toothed cat were to jump a megatherium, it wouldn't face a slow, groggy swipe. A single blow would shatter your ribcage and cause your lungs to collapse instantly. They were stronger than any bear that exists today. A 1,500-pound polar bear would be effortlessly crushed by an 8,000-pound sloth. Megatherium would easily annihilate any modern gorilla. A gorilla's only real hope would be using its intelligence to realize that while the sloth isn't fast, it will delete you instantly if you get too close. The only animals that could compare to a megatherium are elephants, and the strongest ones might only win in a brute pushing contest. When it comes to grip or pull strength, megatherium was likely stronger, simply because elephants cannot pull that easily. It was really the only animal that possessed manipulative forelimbs, meaning actual arm-based force on a giant mass body. Mammoths and elephants definitely cannot grab things or stand on two limbs. Even the short-faced bear was skinny compared to these thick sloths. These beasts would have been apex predators if they actually hunted meat. But is this not a bit of overkill? Do you really need to be built this thick just to eat some leaves? Well, yes, you do. The dangers back then were so vicious that being big wasn't enough. You had to be indestructible. This brings us to a part of sloth anatomy that sounds like fiction, the armor. If you bite a modern sloth, it is soft. It is basically a bag of bones and wet moss. Megatherium possessed osteoderms, tiny marble-sized bones embedded directly inside their skin. They were literally wearing a coat of armor underneath that shaggy fur. Imagine you are a saber-toothed cat, sneaking up on this mountain of meat. You go for the throat, and instead of sinking into flesh, your jaw slams into a hidden wall of calcium. These cats have strong bites, but not strong enough to crush solid bone. While you are wondering how you just shattered your teeth, the giant sloth has ample time to turn around and crush you completely. The armor wasn't a full covering, and most of the strength came from the raw size of the sloth itself. Predators do not hunt fair fights, but with this much mass, Megatherium made every battle unfair in its favor. It was a strategy called passive tanking. Biting them simply didn't work. Interestingly, Megatherium wasn't the only giant sloth. There was also the Lestodon. For years, geologists in South America found these massive, perfectly round tunnels drilled into solid rock. These were large enough for a grown human to walk through without stooping. For decades, no one knew what created them. They didn't look like erosion or volcanic tubes. Some even suggested aliens, but then they saw the scratch marks, massive parallel gouges in the stone. Sloths did this. These are called paleo burrows. Imagine chasing a sloth and it suddenly disappears into a mountain. You peek in and see only infinite darkness and the sound of a 2-ton animal sharpening its claws on the walls. It is game over for you. These tunnels look like something only humans could have dug. But the adaptations didn't stop there. There was also the Thalassocnus, the aquatic sloth. This happened in ancient Peru, which was essentially a coastal desert. There were no trees to climb and no bushes to eat. The land was empty, but the ocean was an all-you-can-eat salad bar of seagrass and kelp. So these sloths evolved to dive. You might think sloths would just float like a wet rug, but evolution gave them a terrifying upgrade called pachyostosis. Their bones became incredibly dense and heavy. While most mammals want light bones to move faster, these guys wanted the opposite. They turned their skeletons into biological diving weights. This allowed them to sink straight to the bottom of the seafloor without struggling against buoyancy. They would use those massive claws as grappling hooks to anchor themselves to rocks against the crashing waves. It sounds like a chill life, but it was actually a terrible existence. The ancient ocean off Peru was a war zone, patrolled by the megalodon and the leviathan. While these sloths were strong, they were only 450 pounds compared to a 100,000-pound whale. You didn't stand a chance. We know these sloths had a terrible time because the fossils we find are absolutely messed up. Nearly every specimen shows signs of healed fractures, ribs shattered and skulls cracked. These guys were getting tossed against jagged rocks or crunched by predators, only to go back into the water and do it all again. They were the ocean's punching bags. So why did they go extinct? For the aquatic sloth, it was the thermostat. Around 3 million years ago, the Isthmus of Panama closed, blocking ocean currents. The water got drastically colder, and the seagrass they relied on died off. They had put all their skill points into one build, and the strategy was destroyed. But what about the tanks, like Megatherium? They survived the cold and the lions for millions of years. What killed an invincible animal? We did. Around 10,000 years ago, a new predator rose: humans. While we aren't as strong as a bear, we have projectile weapons. Megatherium was built to fight things that got close, but it had no defense against a sharp stick thrown from 30 feet away. When humans arrived, these sloths had ecological naivety. They didn't know to be afraid of us. We didn't fight fair. We used strategy and traps to chip away at them until they collapsed. Because they were so massive and slow to reproduce, they couldn't repopulate fast enough once we started hunting them. By 11,000 years ago, they were wiped out. All that's left are today's sloths. They survived by being too small to be a target and hiding high in trees. But don't be fooled. The monster machinery is still there. Their locking grip is identical to the one Megatherium used. Their durability in surviving 90-foot falls is an inheritance from their giant ancestors. They became so slow and boring that the world forgot to kill them off. However, one predator still finds them. We are killing modern sloths by creating traps. To a sloth, a power line looks like a sturdy vine. When they grab it, they complete the circuit, and because their grip is so strong, they cannot let go even while being electrocuted. Then there is the cuteness factor. Because they look like they are smiling, humans want to hug them for selfies. But that smile is just the shape of their skull. In reality, being held puts them in a state of absolute terror. Their heart rates skyrocket, and they can die from the stress. We hunted the giants because they were monsters, and now we might kill the survivors because we think they are teddy bears. Gigantic or not, I don't think the sloths of this planet are very fond of us. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please leave some support and subscribe.